Hey, everybody. Welcome to OK Every Day, a podcast about TA or transactional analysis where we continue to dive into how to make our lives okay every day. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Ollie.
And today we are talking about
Strokes in the workplace.
strokes in the workplace. And it continues our series of talking about strokes this season. So, how do we bridge what we talked about last time,
Yeah,
negative thinking in the stroke profile and strokes in the workplace, Jason?
yeah. I mean, this is a marathon on strokes, we've realized. But as we said before, it's it's so important because I think previously we looked a little bit at strokes and recognition versus feedback. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And then in the
yeah.
last episode, we really much looked at how negative thinking can affect the kind of strokes we do or don't do, both to
Mm,
ourselves and to others.
yeah.
So I think this episode is really, really important because, of course, we spend a lot of time. For those of us who are employed, we spend a lot of time in the workplace, right? Spend a huge, potentially 8 hours a day, 5 days a week,
True.
and even if we're not in the workplace, we're online in work because we're hybrid.
Mm,
So we do spend a huge amount of time working. So therefore, of course, strokes are going to come out in different ways within the workplace, with our colleagues, with our manager, even about the workplace itself. We can talk about our workplaces in lots of different ways. So we're going to look at the kind of the slight impact of negative strokes,
hmm
what goes on there in the workplace. But more importantly, the emphasis we're going to talk about a little bit later on about positive strokes
Right.
and what that does when it's intentionally happening in the workplace, right?
One second, Jason. Are you meaning to tell me that negative strokes happen in the workplace?
Dun, dun, dun. It is true. Not our workplace, Ollie, not you and I.
No.
we're we're very good at the positive strokes and we try and stay away from the
That's
negative strokes intentionally.
true.
But it happens a lot. Whenever you get people working together, you will get negativity starting to
True.
happen. And of course, it can happen unconsciously, but then start to kind of spill out into the team or into,
Right.
again, the organization itself. And it can be very, very destructive. So we're going to look at, what is that? What goes on there, right? And then how to kind of look towards intentionally changing it and doing other things.
Right.
So, I mean, if we think about it a little bit, when we're talking about strokes, we're talking about recognition, okay? Strokes
Right.
meaning recognition. But what's
Right.
the type or quality of recognition that we give or receive? So there's
hmm
two areas there. Obviously, myself.
hmm
So how do I think about myself in terms of what I'm doing, not doing? Am I being very, very critical? And then
Right.
how do I do that with others?
Right.
Like if I'm thinking very, very negatively about someone or something, highly likely I'm going to say something in a negative way towards
Mm.
that someone or something, right? And of
Right.
course,
So,
this will come out in the workplace. So what do you think about that,
Kind of
Ollie?
reminds me of something very important in TA. It's like I can't. Is it I'm okay, you're okay? Kind
I think
of.
you're onto something there.
No, but so exactly what you're saying. I think we will expand on how negative thinking in the workplace and also how it manifests and how it
Mm,
can be countered with the positive reinforcement in the workplace. But I do think that the way we treat ourselves sometimes reflects a lot on how we then treat others, and it kind of shows that as well.
yeah, we were talking about it, and you came up with some thoughts around what can negative thinking about oneself kind of lead to.
Yeah, I think there's multiple examples of how negative thinking can manifest itself at work. I think the one that came to me straight away was imposter syndrome.
Mm,
So, and it's kind of a way people think of they just don't feel belonging into the group they're in based on their knowledge, based on their seniority, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot of this, oh, I don't fit in. I don't think I'm good enough for this
mm.
group of people. So I definitely see that manifesting a lot, even with people who are in the workplace for a long time. Although my personal opinion on imposter syndrome, sometimes it's really healthy. It helps you learn a lot of things, but it's not when it's 2, 3 years in the job and you still feel that, oh, I'm not part of this.
Well, that's lovely,
Um,
Ali, because you've reframed something that actually scares a lot of people.
Right.
Even the phrase itself, imposter syndrome, actually scares a
Mhm.
lot of people. I work with
Mhm.
loads of people who come to me kind of with that. So
Right.
I love what you've done there in terms of actually, one, it doesn't have to be scary, and two, you can actually learn a
No,
lot
true.
by approaching it a different way. But yeah, I mean, your example there is spot on because people forget quite quickly their experience,
True.
and that they belong where they belong because they've got themselves there.
Mhm.
But instead, they chop away their legs with this negative thinking about not being good enough, not knowing what they're doing, and all this horrible stuff, right?
Yeah, you know what? I think in my case, the easy it's not work related, unfortunately, but or fortunately, my injury actually helped me understand this. The incrementality of small gains that you don't see every day, but you see 2 months 2 months after, and you look back as like, oh, I couldn't do a full squat 2 months ago, and now I'm kind of squatting with weights. Amazing, so those kind of things helped um, helped eliminate that internal imposter syndrome I had. Oh, I'm not recovering fast enough, et cetera,
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera. But I think that when you look at it, and I would argue that in the first few months, maybe even years of work, you learn the most. There's a lot of things you learn, new environment, new people, new clients, new internal processes, whatever that is. So you learn a lot, but you have to give yourself time to see how that fits in your head.
yeah, and there'll be a lot of positive strokes that might be give ourselves in there, which is,
Mm,
take time, be patient, don't be so hard on yourself. Could be positive strokes
true.
we give ourselves because, like your example there of recovering from the injury is a great one, because we might get the idea that I'm not recovering fast enough, and it's because of me.
Exactly. And but this is exactly one of the other elements that happens at the workplaces is because of me. So it's
Yes.
because of me something is not happening. Or because of me we missed the target because of me. Or we didn't achieve something because of me. So it's kind of very personal, like personalization of the whole thing, which it's not always true. But sometimes it provides this negative filter or negative thinking towards the people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you named it there. So, as well as imposter syndrome, there's another phrase known as personalization. Personalization
Mm,
is always negative. It's never a personalization really that,
yeah.
oh, it was me and am I great? Because that would be seen as kind of negative narcissism. So, personalization is usually very, very
Wow.
negative because it's blaming ourselves
Mm,
for something not happening. We didn't get the contract and it's all my fault.
mm,
Now, that's very unfair because there's lots of ingredients that come together to win a contract. And there's lots of
mm,
stuff out of a person's influence. So it's not reality based for a start.
mm,
So in TA, we say it comes from the child ego state because it's like giving ourselves, we're blaming ourselves for all of it and forgetting actually there's a
right.
lot of moving pieces,
True.
Um, but it's very, very emotional, like the imposter syndrome. It attacks us on a negative level in an emotional way against ourselves.
Very true.
And that way it doesn't feel good. And unfortunately, then it starts to chop away our confidence and self-esteem. You know?
You know what? Now that I think of it, the observations that I had in the workplace of how people manifest the negative thinking, they have to do a lot with blame generally.
Mm.
It sounds like. So, for example, all or nothing thinking. Is like for example, I forgot to include one slide in the presentation or put some wrong, number there. I screwed it up completely, and it's like it's all my fault, or I'm a terrible public speaker because I forgot to adapt the slides of some sorts. So it's that kind of thinking or catastrophizing. Like, do
Mm.
people just catastrophize as like my boss wants to see me after a meeting. I must have done something very, very wrong. I was like, ooh, what did I do wrong? I was like, I'm probably gonna get fired, or I'm gonna get into some trouble or something like that. So it
Absolutely.
all has to do with this blame element. It feels like, anyway.
Yeah, in a kind of fantasy ways. This is all going on inside our head. You know what
True.
I mean? Right. So it's like we're having these conversations with ourselves that are very, very negative. And this is negative stroking. So we're giving ourselves negative messages. I'm
Mm.
going to get fired. I didn't do it good enough, or you name it. Like all the examples you gave there, not based on any particular reality.
No,
We're just going to have a meeting, but we develop this kind of, very heavy duty, very critical.
we have a very
Uh,
Game of Thrones
oh,
scenarios going on in our heads. Oh, this is what's gonna happen now.
We're under attack and it's my fault. I let them in the gate. That kind of way. But when we were talking about this, we looked at the difference between criticism,
Yes.
right? You want to talk about that?
So
I think it might
th
fit in here.
I think this was my next thought was about critical conversations and criticizing conversations. I actually want to thank you for spotting the difference when we were preparing for this episode. It's like I was trying to understand how to frame it correctly, and you mentioned this in a very good way, is that there's a critical conversation, as in a conversation that needs to be had,
Hmm.
that has to take place, and there's a criticizing conversation, which would include a lot of judgment and saying, "Oh, you did this wrong, or or I did this wrong, or somebody did something wrong." Is kind of putting the blame on someone, not taking responsibility for it, and kind of finding and ultimately making other people feel bad. It's like it's not really you don't feel good when somebody's criticizing you. But when they're having a critical conversation and coming from a very good spaces, and you know what, I've noticed this happening in the meeting with a client, and I think that might have a very negative impact on the client in the long run or in the next meeting where
Mm,
they didn't feel heard when you spoke 70% of the time, the client didn't feel heard. So this is
very
a
so.
lot of these examples where you showcase as well empathy, but also the situation rather than the person and saying, oh, you're not able to listen. That's not what's being said. What's being said is that if you change your behavior, it might improve the situation in a next client conversation or something like that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant segue as well into what we were just talking about there a moment ago, because when we're criticizing somebody, we are making it personal.
Yeah.
You haven't done this, you know? So that then feeds into the negative personalization. And this happens a lot in workplaces, and it's mostly because people haven't prepared the conversation well enough, you know.
Right.
So they just kind of bulldoze in and say, "Oh, I saw you did this, and that wasn't good enough." Blah, blah, blah. And so that then feeds this negative recognition kind of cycle that goes on. Versus what you were just explaining beautifully there, Ollie, which is the critical conversation. Like this is an
Mm.
important conversation to have, you know.
Yes.
So therefore, I'm going to slow down and think about how I'm going to have that with the other person, not to criticize them, but to let them know that this is important. This is an important area to work on. And as you said, you gave a great example of what you observed with the client, and let's see if we can kind of do that differently next time, right? So the framing it up in one's head before having the conversation is so important. And I would say
Mm.
when a critical conversation is done well, like an important conversation done well, it actually leads to quite a bit of positive recognition,
That's true. Okay.
right? Because the
Okay.
other
Yeah.
person probably would appreciate, oh, thanks for that feedback. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to kind of do it differently next time. But I thank you for taking the time to do that. And then the person giving it might feel good. Oh, that went well.
Yeah. Yeah. That
And I'm pleased I
wasn't too
had that
bad.
conversation.
Wasn't too bad. I survived it. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, so there's like a win-win from a critical
Right.
conversation versus a criticizing conversation, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And it sounds like it's also the movie we talk about movies a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A movie just popped into my head. Paid Forward, a very very beautiful movie about
Mm.
a kid that designs a system where they just pay forward good deeds. So it's random act of kindness. I think
Yes,
that's
yeah.
so those kind of things, but not necessarily. It shouldn't be random, but I think if it's intentional,
Mm.
it also gives a positive vibe at the workplace. And this is one of the things that you also mentioned. It's intentional strokes at the workplace, right? So it gives that intentionality to it. So definitely, I think that having the critical conversation versus the criticizing is very, very important to find that balance first of all, and also paying it forward. So the person who receives the critical conversation, they realize, oh, so it doesn't have to be blaming other people. It doesn't have to be, negative. It doesn't have to be difficult. It could be a very adult, maybe,
Oh,
conversation
I would
in a
say it
way.
very much is, yeah, adult. And I love you brought in that movie. We didn't talk about it, yeah, but
No, no.
pay it forward, because I think that's what actually happens.
Mm,
When it's done well, I think it empowers the other person because they've just learned something they didn't know and they
yeah.
were open to accepting it, which makes them actually in the long term a better leader, first of all, of themselves, right?
Oh,
So when they're talking to the client next, but then later on, they'll have this good experience with a manager or
right.
even a colleague, and as you said, like pay it forward. So they're more likely to mimic that
Hmm.
going forward, therefore get into their adult and have a better conversation. Because I think when we are intentional
Hmm.
about how we say things, we kind of eliminate the negative.
Right.
Because we don't say, I'm intentionally going to go and be really negative to that person to make them feel really bad. No, that's very rare. If that happens, that's very rare. So when we're being intentional, we're already, I think, showing positive intention,
True.
and therefore positive strokes start to grow into that space.
Mm.
That
Mm.
I want to do this well for me and the other person. So
Right.
there's a learning experience, and then when it's received well, it's like thank yous, and go off and on about the business, right?
That is true. And listen, you mentioned one definition that was new to me yesterday, when we were preparing to the episode, was stroke poor environments.
Yes, yeah, I love this. Uh,
What is that?
yeah, I love this phrase because it reminds me
Okay.
to be more intentional with my
Okay.
strokes, right? So a stroke poor environment is when there is a lack of intentional positive strokes,
Hmm.
right? Now
Right.
it's positive strokes because negative strokes often will just fill the vacuum,
Hmm.
because we're kind of stroking all the time, like in terms of recognizing people, like all the
Right.
time, like how like you and I recognize each other by talking, So we're kind of, as long as we're communicating, there's strokes going on, but
Right.
often they're, low level or low quality or negative, just kind of fills
Hmm.
the space. But and that becomes then therefore a stroke poor environment. So a stroke enriched environment is where I
Hmm.
intentionally give positive strokes
Right.
to either the people I care about or the people I work with. So,
Mm.
but it needs an intentionality. Like I remember not that long ago, I was observing an oral exam, a transaction analysis oral exam, and as an
Okay.
observer, I don't get involved, but I give feedback after. We
Hmm.
contract around, what would be useful. And one of the things I said after was I noticed with this panel, it was a bit stroke poor. The candidate did a lot of really good stuff,
Mm.
and I think you caught it, but you didn't feed back to the candidate that they
Mm.
answered that question really well, or you like how they did that, you liked how they put that piece of theory together. You know what I mean? Or
Mm.
that you even just like how well they're managing the process of the oral exam, because it can be quite intimidating, right?
Right.
So a stroke rich environment would be intentionally giving um, those pieces of positive strokes. So interesting, later on in the day, I was on a panel with two of the other people,
Okay.
and in preparation for the oral exam, I said to them, guys, I really want this to be a stroke rich environment. Would that be okay with you? And they said, oh yes, okay. And it was a much nicer feeling. So it was like catching the candidate doing things well and feeding it back to them. And it just made it a much nicer environment for the candidate in particular, right?
You know what comes up to me as I think that sometimes being in a stroke-rich environment might be simply uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's like I think an example you mentioned before is receiving compliments, right? Some people
Right.
just might not be comfortable with it because of whatever happened. Doesn't really matter. That's not what we're discussing, but sometimes being in a stroke-rich environment might be simply uncomfortable. And what came
Absolutely.
to what came to mind for me was kind of, and we prepared for this as well, as I was looking at my career as a spectrum, right? So a spectrum of places, of workplaces, where there were, I'd say, stroke-poor environments, and there were stroke-rich environments. And where it comes to positive recognition, for example, in these environments, some places the positive recognition was just the salary at the end of the month, and
Mm.
which in fact would not be a positive recognition. It's the contract that I invest my time and my skills for this, and I receive the payment as a result of that. So and kind of the coffee and tea and biscuits were the kind of the height of positive recognition at work. At the same time, right now, the environment that I work in is a very stroke rich environment, because not only are we encouraged at Google as a culture to encourage one another of how we work, but there is also let's say, formal bonus programs internally where I can say thank you to one of my peers or in different kind of ways, with value tied to it, without value tied to it, whatever it is. But there's also, so it's recognized by the company as that, yes, please do it. If somebody did an amazing job, go ahead and recognize them. So I think what and it's amazing to have this experience of both types of environments, because you realize that the stroke rich environment is actually somewhere where you feel much more comfortable, because
Mm.
it's simply it's easier to talk with people, and you know that people are always going to have your back when you have an off day, because sometimes you're going to have an off day, and the other people might, you know what, take a break, or let me
Yeah,
help you with something, or why don't we solve this together? So there's a kind of communal approach towards it, which is really, really helpful in the workplace.
yeah,
As a manager at the same time, I think the thing that stands out to me in positive recognition a lot is contracting. So understanding how the other person is good at receiving or would benefit from receiving certain forms of positive recognition? Would it be more on a personal basis? Would it be more on a public basis? How the person feels comfortable about it? Would it be an email? Would it be just like a chat saying, "Oh, you did a great job here," or whatnot? So I think that would always be something that I'm looking at,
mm,
as in how to intentionally contract with the person and understand what's the best way to give a positive stroke or a positive recognition towards them. And so far in my career as a manager, that's been the most beneficial way of understanding and growth of the person, but also deepening my relationship with the people that I work with. So those would be
lovely.
the few things that come to mind. I'm sorry, that was a monologue of my part.
Well, no, because it's so important, and I imagine our viewers and listeners, really resonate with that because most of us nowadays have worked in many different workplaces
Right.
and a work environment, and then we can spot where there's good stroking going on, and then other
Yeah.
times where there's negative stroking going on. So I
Mm.
think having that kind of reference point is really, really important.
True.
And like where you brought it to, Ollie, is you know a build on what I was talking about, the panel,
Mm.
which in your organization you build into the system,
Right.
that it's going to be a stroke rich environment. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's really important to do that. And how often is that neglected, when thinking about culture? Make sure you spot people doing things well and tell them.
Mm. Mm.
And then the last part was actually, I think, the really human bit
Mm.
as a manager leader. How do people like to receive positive recognition? As we say in
Right.
transaction analysis, different strokes for different folks, right? Not everybody receives it exactly the same, so I think to me that would be, a lovely intentional
Mm.
conversation, or it is a lovely intentional conversation you have with your team. Like, how do they want to receive positive recognition? Because you want to
Mm.
give it, right? So, is it an email? Is it a, you know, uh, meeting? Is it okay to do it in front of people? I think that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I think that's so huge. That's okay, okay, being lived out right there.
Oh yeah. Okay. 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 I like that. By the way, with this conversation, my question to you is there such thing as too much positive recognition?
Yeah, that's really interesting because we did one on the stroke economy, which is
True.
this myth that there's only so many strokes in the world. It's like there's only so many compliments in the world you can give before you run out, and that turns out that's not true at all. Okay, um, is there too much? Um, I would edge towards no, but
Okay.
there is I can move into, and we haven't talked about this, things like marshmallow strokes,
Ooh.
where it's like throwing a marshmallow at somebody. It doesn't really stick because it was. I don't. It only just came to my head there. Sorry. So people can move into giving positivity in a not so genuine, authentic way. It's
Yeah.
it's light and soft and something like not very specific or whatever. So we can overdo it by not being so intentional, and it loses
Right.
its quality, right?
Mm.
Uh, I would still edge towards, there's too much negative stroking going on, right?
Mm,
So any emphasis on positive, I think, is probably a good thing, even if it is a little bit marshmallowy.
right.
We can get better at that. But I just think there's a lot of negativity that fills the void, unfortunately. So I'd be
Mm.
more moving towards be intentional with your positivity. I mean, what do you think? Is there a possibility of there being too much positive stroking going on?
I'd actually agree with you that there's far, far more negative stroking going on. Um, and ironically, I think we're just much more used to them
Yeah,
in whatever
yeah, yeah.
in whatever scenario or the context may be. I think what stands out to me of what you said, I think there is a great opportunity for everyone to just provide more positive strokes, but also having this, I think really resonated to me this episode is having this critical versus criticizing
Mm,
conversation.
mm,
And because then it's not about positive, negative, then it's about having critical conversations and giving positive strokes, and that's it. And negative strokes, I don't think they'll ever be eliminated, or nor they maybe shouldn't be eliminated because it might be a form of defense or whatever it is. But I think definitely kind of looking into the way of minimizing them, as in we don't want to fight. What we want is to grow and progress together, and
mm.
that's the thing. So I think I'd plus humongously to what you were saying about minimizing the negative strokes, but having these critical and conversations and positive reinforcements.
Yeah. I what I tend to talk to people about is double up.
Mm.
Because on the back of exactly what you're saying there is, for whatever reason, like we can't just get negative and it won't ever go away. But we
Right.
can, if we fill the space with other stuff, then it has less chance, like there's less oxygen,
Mm.
you know what I mean? So I always say like double up. So if you give somebody a positive stroke, give yourself one too for giving them a positive stroke. So all of a sudden you get double the amount happening at the same time to counteract
Beautiful.
the negative stuff, right? So and people work hard. I believe people go to work to want to do a good job, so they want to put themselves into it. And in particular, managers and leaders, they're in a role of responsibility, so they have to carry a little bit more stress,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Um, I think it's so important to be driving this positivity, if you want to call it that way. And the more you do that, the more you minimize the other stuff, but just by energy,
True.
you know.
And when I was thinking about strokes in the workplace, based on kind of my own experience, there were three things that stood out, and were one was critical versus criticizing
Mm,
conversation. Second was the spectrum of positive recognition across the career. So it's very different experiences, and not necessarily good or bad, because like even when I was saying the example of I went to work and the recognition was getting the salary at the end of the month. I mean, I didn't feel bad about it. It was just the way things were. But in retrospect and in contrast, I can compare, oh yeah, it's much more fun to be positively recognized on something that you're doing versus just receiving the paycheck at the end of the month. But also the third thing was challenging the stroke filter, and you've mentioned this numerous times over our stroking marathon that we've had at the beginning of season two, is specifically when you kind of give a positive stroke or positive recognition, make sure that the person actually gets it. I think that's sometimes so vital in workspaces because there's a lot of disregard of it. It's like, yeah, yeah, that was just my job. No, 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 no. You did an excellent job there. Please hear me.
nice.
I think it's also it adds to that positive recognition and doing more good than negative strokes, I think. So those would be the three things that stand out for me for sure in terms of strokes in the workplace. But you also mentioned that there's science behind it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um, I mean, on that one there, Ollie, I think spot on, and I love how you do that now. Is make sure the other person gets it, in not not in a critical way. In a this is important that you hear this. It's don't let it bounce off the filter. And gradually over time, that their filter will start to kind of soften, which is exactly what you want.
True, true.
But yeah, so in that example there, what you're doing as a leader is really, really important, because it also, what the science shows is, with positive recognition on a regular basis, it it helps people manage stress better,
Right.
effectively, is what it does, both
Okay.
physiologically, psychologically, and emotionally. right? So if I'm giving good feedback or good recognition on a regular basis, they start to trust me as a leader. You know what I mean?
Mm,
I see them and I see what they're doing and I appreciate what they're doing and I let them know that. So straight away you start to create more trust in a team, more bonding, more what's known as oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical. So the
mm,
more likely, as you said, to have your back or have each other's back. And in sports, this plays out a lot. You know what I mean? That you can
wow.
rely on your players to be there,
Mm,
you actually know where they are. It also helps people manage their system better because under stress, adrenaline, cortisol swashing around, and when there's like a lot of heightened stuff, that's when we can get more critical and negative.
mm,
We can start to give ourselves a hard time or start to get very finger pointy. You didn't, under high levels of stress or pressure, right?
mm,
So the more we can get positive recognition flowing in the team as part of maybe it's a team charter or something that we all agree on, the more they will handle stress better and perform better because they can handle stress better.
mm-hmm,
So it creates this lovely loop, but it's got to be intentional. That's the trick. It has to be intentional because if
mm.
it doesn't, we'll slip into that negativity and blame, and then stress increases.
Wow. Mm. This is so good. When you said the positive recognition, I wrote down improve stress, but what I actually meant would be decreases stress.
Spot on.
Decreases stress and improves performance. It actually resonated a lot. So whenever there's, even when there's tough times. And since I work in sales, there have been numerous quarters where we didn't hit target, and when we were behind target. But I think whenever there's positive reinforcement coming from all parts of the team, I think it just makes it a little easier to cope with the stress and perform, impact
Mm-hmm.
on something that we actually can impact rather than just worry about something else or worry that somebody's going to be mad of us not achieving something, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of more focusing on what we actually can control
Mm,
than we can't.
mm. And we're in it together. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we're gonna work with each other here, and part of that work will be telling each other what we do well. So intentionally get it in there. And actually, just before we finish up, Ali, I'm going to come back to something that you shared with me just yesterday, I think it was, and I think it shows up. I think positive recognition and trust and safety shows up in jujitsu. How you
Jiu-jitsu, yes.
jujitsu, how you uh, start a jujitsu bout. Tell,
S-
t- tell
Oh
us more
yeah,
about that.
this is a great. I know I really hope that sometime soon we're going to do a TA/Jiu-Jitsu episode. This is maybe even a marathon. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to be doing the jujitsu. You'll be doing.
But there's a way the way that it drives a parallel to me, and I'm gonna try to explain this both visually and audially for the people listening. So if you when you start a sparring or even some kind of practice in jiu-jitsu and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, what you would do is you would kind of give a high five and a fist bump. So you do this, which for me resembles I'm okay, you're okay, and I respect you, and I respect myself in this bout. And also when you feel that you're not in a good position and you're you're gonna well basically pass out or something bad's gonna happen, you tap. So you say that's enough, let's stop, let's reconvene or let's restart. I'm okay to forfeit right now
Mm,
because I don't want to get hurt or I don't I don't want basically I don't want to get hurt.
mm,
So I think that was one of the things that resonated a lot for me with jujitsu and transaction analysis is this kind of I'm okay, you're okay philosophy.
mm,
Starting going into any even competition. So you'd see this in competitions
mm.
all the time. People would high five, fist bump.
Yes, I think it's lovely. I think there's a lot of positive recognition in there. It's
Yeah.
like saying, look, we're in this together,
Yes.
and there's certain rules that we're going to stick to. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think just that little kind of hand gesture, the fist pump and the high five, is a sign saying like we've agreed to this and builds trust.
True.
That yeah, even though it's going to be competition, no question about it, because that's part of the agreement. But it's
Oh yeah.
competition within kind of agreed structure. So I just came to my mind there because we were talking about it yesterday. I think that's a really good way of building trust
True.
in the process, and the
And
variation of that for teams, right?
it's the same way in the workspace if you think about it.
Mm.
So even in the morning, if you would come up to your team members and just examine, anyone could examine this because I've tested it out a few times in my career. Is that there were mornings when I went in and didn't say hello, good morning to anyone. I didn't shake hands or didn't give a high five or whatever. And there are mornings when well, usually I would. I would say hi. I would acknowledge that people are there if they came in the morning or a little later. It doesn't matter. So that the time, the time at work, the time which they show up at work is not that important, but it's just kind of recognizing that they're there.
Mm.
And I think there's an enormous amount of trust from people who realize, oh, this manager, this leader came up and said hi to me. That's really I like that. And I feel the same way when my manager would, or managers generally would come up on the floor and say hi and good morning to everyone. I think it just creates that aura of trust overall. So
Yeah, yeah.
definitely
And they,
true.
I'm okay, you're okay, right?
Yes, yes, I'm okay. You're okay. Jason, we've been talking for nearly 36 minutes now. How do you think we've done so far?
I think we've done a very good job. And I'm dying to hear back from the leaders too, sorry, the people who are listening and watching to see if they've got any feedback for us. Um, for me, I think we've done a good journey of the importance of
Oh yeah.
positive, intentional positive stroking in the workplace. And my hope, my genuine hope, is that people carry it forward. They start to do this more intentionally this week in
Yeah,
whatever way. And it doesn't have to be in the workplace solely. It can be at home too. It
could
pays
be
off then
anywhere.
too, anywhere.
I think the key word there is intentional positive recognition or intentional strokes. And we've covered a huge amount of ground here in terms of how negative thinking can impact the stroking on the workplace, how our strokes, especially if they're negative, how that impacts us, but also how we then in turn impact others. I think it's also pretty important to understand that there are different strokes for different folks. This is a new thing, and I'm thinking I've got my creative juices thinking how we can use that for future episodes. But different strokes for different folks is how do people like or they're equipped to receive those strokes, and how are we aware of that? Especially if you're a manager and managing a team. And we talked about the science about positive recognition. I think that was really, really powerful. That the positive recognition help us decrease stress and increase productivity. So we've covered a huge amount of ground.
Good.
And you know what? I'll say this, dear viewers, dear listeners, thank you very much for being with us on this episode of OK Everyday, where Jason and I talked about strokes in the workplace. And if you like this video, please press the like button and share your comments in the section below. If you're interested in TA content, you're at the right place. And we'll keep you informed of every new OK Everyday episode coming out in the near future on YouTube and Spotify. In any case, we really hope that you stay OK
Every day.
every day.